I want to thank you all for being here. For us, it's extremely important this day and this topic that we are discussing today. I want to give you a big welcome to the third annual Thomas Lovejoy and Edward Wilson panel, which is part of our NYBG's Climate Week conference. And this year, we decided to title Nature's Shield, Harnessing Biodiversity for Climate Resilience. It is an honor to have you all here as we dive into a crucial and timely topic, nurturing nature through plant-based solutions for long-term climate resilience. Our panel today is composed of distinguished experts who bring immense experience in biodiversity conservation, sustainable development, and climate action. We are joined here by Christian Samper, Managing Director and Leader for Nature-Based Solutions at the Bezos Earth Fund, whose global perspective on funding and scaling nature-based solutions is pivotal. Paula Caballero, Regional Managing Director for Latin America at the Nature Conservancy, a trailblazer in environmental policy, including her foundational role in developing the Sustainable Development Goals. She is known to be the mother of the Sustainable Development Goals. Monica Medina, the Arnold Distinguished Fellow at Conservation International, who has played a key role in both government and NGO efforts to address biodiversity and climate challenges, particularly in the marine and freshwater realms. And finally, Paul Smith, Secretary General of Botanic Gardens Conservation International, who has been a champion for the role of botanic gardens in conserving plant biodiversity and promoting nature-based climate resilience. Together, these experts will help us explore the incredible potential of plant-based solutions to mitigate climate change. Plants, whether we are talking about trees, grasses, mangroves, or even algae, are the foundation of life on Earth. They capture carbon, regulate water cycles, and provide food, shelter, and livelihoods for billions of people and countless species. And yet, despite the growing recognition of their vital role, implementation of plant-based solutions often falls short of what is needed to address the climate and biodiversity crisis meaningfully. This panel will not only look at how we can better harness the power of plants in climate mitigation through conservation, restoration, afforestation, and sustainable agroecology. We also will look into the barriers we face in scaling these efforts. We'll examine how to halt the drivers of environmental degradation and how to engage and educate policymakers, stakeholders, and society at large about the importance of integrating plant-based strategies into global climate action. Our conversation will touch on the urgent need to bridge the gap between scientific knowledge and policy implementation, and to ensure that these solutions are inclusive and equitable, providing long-term benefits for both people and the planet. With that, I will ask you please to join me with an applause before we begin this fantastic discussion. So I would like to start discussing this topic with Paula. So Paula, given your extensive experience in environmental policy, what do you think is needed so that Latin American nations, for instance, can effectively conserve biodiversity and implement nature-based solutions contributing to both regional and global climate resilience?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation today. One always likes to say this, but I really mean it today. that it is a pleasure and a privilege, a very distinct privilege, to be following from the words of Wade Davis, because I think he sets the scene perfectly for what is needed. And I'll go into more technical aspects, but what we really need is a change of mindset. And I think Wade has outlined very clearly what that change of mindset is. And that change of mindset is also what was behind this at the moment when it was proposed, a very crazy idea, which were the SDGs, and I can come back to that. But it is that change of perspective and understanding to what degree we are a part of the problem that is the genesis of the change and the transformation we need. So Latin America is without a doubt at the heart of what we can achieve with nature-based solutions. We know the numbers in terms of the percentage of biodiversity, the 1/3 of fresh water, the cultural diversity. But the other side of the coin is also that Latin America is a growing breadbasket. And 70% of land use change in Latin America is driven by agriculture and ranching. If cows were a country, they would occupy 36% of the land in Latin America. So that's also the reality around what we need to do to address these drivers. But the beauty of it is that Latin America still has extraordinary ecological connectivity and functionality. So it is urgent and important to implement nature-based solutions with that kind of mindset across the entire continent. The potential is enormous for conservation, for restoration, for sustainable land management. In comparison, for example, to Africa or Asia, Latin America has the greatest potential for generating carbon offsets through nature-based solutions. So I see Latin America as this amazing living laboratory where we can generate the kind of innovation and disruption that is needed to address these interconnected crises of biodiversity, climate, and very importantly, equity, which is, I think, also at the heart of what Wade was talking about. But the mindset that we need to change in Latin America, and that I think is very prevalent, and Minister Mohammed was also alluding to this, is a mindset that's very extractive and sees nature as something to be taken from. And changing that mindset and understanding the degree to which our economies and our productive processes have biodiversity firmly and ecosystem services embedded in them is something that is not recognized. And so in Latin America, we also need to be able to generate the evidence and change that misconception of this dichotomy between conservation and development when they really are one. And I think that that is the power of nature-based solutions, because nature-based solutions can demonstrate the win-win, the no regrets, the integrated responses that are needed, that are good for all stakeholders, including nature as a stakeholder. So 3 aspects that I'll highlight. There's a big array of tools and efforts that we can make, but 3 that I will highlight. One is the global commitment to 30 by 30, that we will conserve 30% of the world's lands, waters, oceans by 2030. And Latin America obviously is absolutely central to that equation. But the way that we need to do that is really to broaden the toolkit. We have very strong networks of protected areas. But what Wade was showing us about what the achievement was in Colombia, spearheaded by Martin von Hildebrand, to have that recognition and the security of land tenure of indigenous and collective territories, that is absolutely central. Probably the single most important thing that we can do right now to address those interconnected crises is to advocate and to protect tenure rights and the stewardship of collective territories. About 80% of the world's biodiversity is in these territories, and 39% of the planet that is still in good ecological condition is in indigenous. And I use that word lightly and sparingly. I drove over here with Wade, and we both agree, as he said, that indigenous is just this catch-all that becomes a disservice. But let me use it for now. And that means that we need to work with indigenous peoples. And that's something that, one of the many reasons why I joined TNC, because we have a track record of working with indigenous peoples and not for indigenous peoples. That's a huge distinction, because it's working with to build out the leadership and the governance structures to enable them to have the self-determination to define their world vision and to translate their world vision into their territories. And it has nothing to do with, as Wade again was saying, progress. It has to do about enabling different kinds of realities. But another really important aspect of that is that social protection has got to be aligned with forest protection. That is a core part of nature-based solutions. And that is also the divide that we need to bridge. We need to secure and safeguard their livelihoods, their culture. And that has to be a core part of that is conservation for the 21st century. We have great examples. In Ecuador, for example, we've developed co-created with over 80 indigenous nations, the fluvial reserves or water reserve networks, which are in management of huge areas, huge jurisdictions that deliver on that world vision and enable the protection and the effective use, the sustainable use of territories that are critical in the upper watershed of the great Amazon River. The other aspect, though, is the footprint of agriculture and ranching. We talk very much, and I very much welcome that in Cali we're going to be talking about mainstreaming. I have a real problem with the word mainstreaming, because mainstreaming is a little bit often that you take whatever you're doing and you give it a little bit of a manicure, you tweak it. You do not do the structural and the systems change that you need across different sectors, in particular agriculture and ranching. And so what those structural changes mean is that you have to look for entry points that you can effectively scale, and that it's not just about training 200 or 200,000 farmers, that it is about shifting the levers. And a key thing that TNC has been working on is traceability. Traceability becomes, it's not a panacea, but it becomes a key to unlock changes across entire sectors. So we're working on electronic monitoring with industrial fisheries. Chile has just put forward very forward-looking policy. We're working with the government of Pará, where we're going to have COP30. They have just announced last year a game-changing initiative, a decision by the state government to ensure that all 24 million head of cattle in that state are fully traced, individually traced, from the minute they are born to when their lives end, to ensure that there's no deforestation anywhere along the value chain. Now, these are complex issues and complex solutions, but it is possible to do that. And so we need to look at how we shift entire structures, how we shift entire sectors. And the last is that to break that destructive cycle that we're seeing so much playing out of land degradation, then land conversion and abandonment, restoration also is to be at the heart of the Latin American response to nature-based solutions. And that really goes just hand in hand with innovative solutions to work with the productive sectors. And restoration, unless we manage to do that, we're looking at the conversion in the next years of areas twice the size of Mexico, when what science is telling us that those are exactly the kind of numbers that need to be restored. So if we're not going to have these irreversible losses, we need to have restoration be a core part of the picture. These are also complex issues, and there's a lot of challenges that I'm sure the panel will get further into, but we need to look at these solutions in a very integral way. So I think that Latin America has enormous potential to be a true leader in nature-based solutions, but only if we change the extractive mindset, only if we change and understand the different stakeholders and the different realities that have to be incorporated into any kind of solution going forward.
Thank you so much, Paula. That was a true toolkit of recommendations for Latin America, and let's now think a little bit about the challenges, how we deal with, how we achieve this. So you're mentioning about reducing the footprint of agriculture, the importance of the global commitment of 30 by 30, transferring stewardship of lands to indigenous communities, working with indigenous communities and not for them, and the importance of ecological restoration. And many of these actions rely also on solid scientific knowledge. So my next question is to Christian. From your leadership positions in global conservation organizations, What have you found to be the most significant challenges in linking biodiversity conservation with climate mitigation efforts and scientific research, including all these aspects that Paula is mentioning? And how can the conservation community address these challenges?
Well, thanks, Mauricio. It's great to be in this panel to follow my dear friend Wade. Wonderful lecture. And I do want to take a moment just to say how honored I am to be here in a panel that's dedicated to Ed Wilson and Tom Lovejoy. Ed was one of my teachers at Harvard. I had the opportunity of taking Ed Wilson to Colombia, to the house of Mutis in Mariquita many years ago. And Tom was one of my mentors, and I remember visiting Camp 41 in the Amazon, spending time with them. So it's their memories and their ideas continue to live with us today here. I mean, as you say, I'm a scientist that trained as a scientist, as a tropical biologist. But my journey has sort of been a little bit of what's happened to many tropical biologists. We discovered that we all get fascinated by nature. We want to document it. I was writing scientific papers. Then you realize many of these papers are places that you're documenting, things are being lost. And at some point you're documenting extinction. And at some point you say you can't just do that. You want to do something about it. So mine is one of those journeys of a scientist realizing we have to use science to change it and do something about it, and working with the people. My journey started in Colombia in a place called La Planada Nature Reserve. And it's an intellectual journey I think many of us have seen. I'm as a scientist, I'm a very, very firm believer. We need to have the right information at the right time in the hands of the right people to be able to make big changes. Now, we're fortunate that we live at a point right now, we've never had more tools or more knowledge at our disposal. Everything from genomics, as Wade mentioned, to remote sensing. It's extraordinary the amount of information that we have. And yet a lot of that information is not at the fingertips of the people who need to use it. Let me just give you one example. The largest collection of birds of Colombia is at the American Museum of Natural History here in New York. Most Colombians don't have access to that information right now. The herbarium right here has a tremendous amount of richness. Now, fortunately, we've moved forward with digitizing the information, making it available, and really linking it. But I think we have a lot of issues, and that's just the knowledge we have. We still have huge frontiers that we don't understand, places we have not explored. We do not know what's happening below ground. I mean, we talk about measuring biomass and trees. We have no idea what's happening under in the soil biomass there, and the role of fungi in sequestering carbon, and so many critical issues in terms of understanding these systems. And I do think we need to bring these issues to bear on the key issues. One of my early roles in my career was in Colombia when we created the Humboldt Institute, working with Claudia Martinez, who's here, and others, as a boundary institution. Part of what we needed to do is bring the knowledge of the scientific community to the hands of people like Susana Mohammed, so she can make the right decisions at the right time. The politicians are always making decisions every day, and yet they don't always have that information because it's locked up in scientific papers or herbariums or issues, and we need to bring it to bear in the conservation realm. Now, fortunately, we see Latin America, Colombia, Latin America, the US, we have very strong institutions, very committed people that are ready to do this, and I'm very happy to see that more and more conservation groups like the Wildlife Conservation Society, where Monica and I worked, and many others, are increasingly bringing scientists to bear to these issues to really be able to have a voice in these key issues. But we have to really make sure that we bridge that gap, and that we bring not only the scientific knowledge, but that traditional knowledge that Wade so clearly issued, because that's what we need to be able to steward and bring about the changes that we need. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity. I think we're all going to be at COPs. I've been to pretty much every biodiversity COP, but I think we have a real opportunity to continue pushing this, and we'll come back to it later, but to conserve what we have, to restore what we've lost, and to transform the way we live, which is what we need and what the world needs to be able to have a better future.
Thank you so much, Christian. And while you were talking about the importance of having the right information, I was thinking about, I want to share a quick example about Colombia. We still don't know the flora and the fungi, especially the fungi, the richness of the diversity of fungi in Colombia. So we recently tried to catalog all the known species of fungi for Colombia. We found 7,481 species, but we estimate that there should be about 300,000. 300,000. There's no national fungarium. So when we were collecting the fungi, we ended up with hundreds of specimens, and we didn't know who could receive them. We tried different institutions. They said, we don't have a fungarium here. And that was what used to happen in the past, where we didn't have collections of references. And that's why many times, like even in the initial expeditions that the New York Botanical Garden was doing in the early 1900s, we had to receive these specimens here because those countries didn't have the proper infrastructure. And now it's a big responsibility that we have, and we are honoring it, to make accessible this information. Today we have 4.7 million specimens in the virtual herbarium, and that number is increasing every day. And it reflects part of our commitments to make this knowledge accessible for decision-making, for the whole community, not just academic community, but anyone, because this information is critical to make the best decisions in the countries. And now we've been talking about plants, ecosystems as a whole, fungi, for now, in the land. But I promise you that this is going to be a very integrative discussion. And we are very pleased to have Monica Medina joining the panel. And my next question is to you. So as you can imagine, Monica is an expert on marine environments. And you might think, well, but this is a botanical garden, right? Well, the New York Botanical Garden has the world's largest collection of algae. We have experts on algae working here every day. New species being described. But also, we carry out research on ecosystems that are critical for the marine environments, mangroves, salt marshes, and lots of ecosystems where plants are also foundational. So my question to you is, with your background in marine conservation and as the first US special envoy for biodiversity and water resources, how do you see ocean ecosystems contributing to climate resilience? And what more can be done to protect marine biodiversity in the face of climate change?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you for being included on this panel. I want to echo what everyone said about what an honor it is and how much I remember the chances I had to interact with Tom Lovejoy and E.O. Wilson, and what an inspiration they were to me as a lawyer, not a biologist or an ecologist, but a lawyer. And I have to say I'm a little bit emotional because as Wade was giving his incredible remarks, across my phone came pictures of my own grandson in utero. My daughter had a sonogram this morning, and she sent the photos through. So I have my heart a little in my throat this morning because it does remind me again why I do the work I do on marine and land conservation. It is for those future generations, and I want to echo what Minister Muhammad said about peace and being at peace with nature, and take a minute to say, you said, Wade, that we can make protected areas, but we can't protect culture. And I agree, it's very hard to protect culture, and we have to keep trying and keep working on it. But making protected areas isn't so easy. And that's been my job. And you also said one other thing, which is important, which is we can make protected areas, But we have to do it. We have the power to destroy. We also have the power to protect. And so it's been the pleasure of my career to try to protect the vast part of this planet that had no protection essentially before. The ocean is 70% of the planet's surface, 70%. 50% almost lies beyond national jurisdiction, the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And so probably the most important thing I'll ever do in my lifetime is I helped to work on an agreement that the UN agreed last year to govern for protection, for biodiversity protection, those 50%, those huge areas of the high seas that had no protection before. And I have to say, you only, thinking back to Tom's Lovejoy's, his name itself is evocative of what you have to do. It's hard to protect the things you don't know. It's hard to love the things you don't know. And the far reaches of the ocean are some of the most mysterious places on Earth, like deep in the Amazon. There's so many things that haven't yet been discovered, and the promise that they provide for life-sustaining medicine or just understanding better our Earth's systems as we face these climate crises, it's profound. And so when I think about the contribution the ocean can make, let's talk about carbon. It absorbs 90% of the excess heat that we make when we burn fossil fuels. It's also a place that provides hundreds of thousands of people jobs and billions of people food. So its protection couldn't be more important. So this treaty that we've worked on now has, I think, maybe 20 signatures. No, I'm sorry. It has 100 signatures, but it only has about 10 or so countries that have ratified it, which means it needs a lot more countries to ratify it, to make it part of their law in order for it to go into effect. And I hope that will happen over the next year, because time is getting away from us when it comes to protecting the ocean. People think it's so vast. One of my other favorite bosses is a famous marine ecologist, Jane Lubchenco, who always talks about how people think it's too big to fail, but in fact, it's so fragile, it's too big to let it fail. And yet we are hammering it with pollution and climate change, ocean acidification. It's under stress, we're overfishing, we're extracting way too much. We don't even really have a good handle on how much less the governance structures and the ways to monitor and enforce what few rules we have out there. So I hope if I leave you with that alone, it's that the ocean is a key part of our protection that we need to provide the planet. And that's why that 30 by 30 pledge is so important, because it includes the ocean. And I'm pleased to say that the US government took that pledge. President Biden, before he even took office, had embraced the 30 by 30 pledge. And the US government is working hard, has protected in his administration a huge amount of new additional land. But again, it requires us to have the political will to make those changes, and I hope that we can retain that. The last thing I'll say is that coastal ecosystems, while we may know them better, are an important, a crucial part of our ability to tackle the climate crisis, feed people, and provide wonders for us to enjoy who can't go scuba diving or far out into the deep of the ocean. But we can at least imagine it because we can put our toes in it. And those ecosystems are also incredible carbon powerhouses. Ocean ecosystems, coastal ocean ecosystems, can provide 4 times the carbon storage potential of land-based systems. So we've only just begun to tap that in the systems that we're trying to create now with blue carbon credits that will pay countries or communities to protect those areas, to restore more mangroves. We need to restore. Mangroves have been destroyed at an alarming rate. I think we've lost 65% of them across the planet. So we know that an ocean that is healthy will keep us as humans healthy, and it's a key part of both climate and biodiversity solutions and our own spiritual connection to Earth. So thank you very much again for letting me be on this panel, and look forward to the conversation.
As you say, Monica, it's very hard to protect things that we don't know, and we are like in a race trying to understand biodiversity well. At the same time, it's disappearing, including all the knowledge associated to it. But we are trying to do our best, and recognizing the importance of ecosystems, like the marine ecosystems, in terms of carbon storage, is incredibly crucial if we want to be successful in our fight to stop and mitigate the effects of climate change. Restoration of mangroves is absolutely critical, as you are mentioning. And we are inviting you all to stay for the Blue Carbon documentary after lunch. That will demonstrate what we can do with our efforts to restore mangroves. So thank you very much. And also I want to take the opportunity to mention that a few weeks ago we joined the Global Mangrove Alliance. So,
Can I add one last thing? I meant to say this before, and it has nothing to do with oceans, sadly, but it's important. There is a third COP this year. We know of the biodiversity COP. We know of the climate COP. The third COP has to do with land restoration, land degradation, land restoration. It's the CCD, the Convention to Combat Desertification COP. And that one is equally important. So I hope people will keep that on their radar screens and maybe go to that one too, if you can.
Absolutely. So, as you probably have seen, institutions such as this one in YBG is critical. We work in mangroves. We carry out research on algae, but also we are in the Amazon forest and in the forest of Myanmar and Vietnam, and in Ethiopia and in Morocco. We work in 81 countries. So my next question is to you, Paul. As Secretary General of Botanic Gardens Conservation International, that by the way is the world's largest network of botanical gardens, you will correct me, and perhaps the most important network of conservation.
All true, yeah.
How do you see the role of botanic gardens evolving in the fight against climate change, particularly in terms of conserving plant biodiversity and developing plant-based climate resilient solutions?
Thank you, Mauricio, and it is a great pleasure to be here as well for this really important meeting and a really important week as well. I think the first thing to say is that the word botanic or botanical garden, that phrase, can mean different things to different people. And it's really important for, I think, the audience to understand that that BGCI, that was established by IUCN about 40 years ago, has a mission which is about mobilizing botanical expertise for plants and people and the planet. And that means that our focus is very much on conservation, on plant conservation, and that means also that our membership, which constitutes about 900 botanical and forestry organizations around the world, we have a register of about 3,500, is a very broad church. So it's not just your traditional Western botanic garden. It includes, if I can use the word, indigenous gardens, ethnobotanical gardens in places like the Amazon, in Uganda, in Kenya, and so on. A whole range of different organizations that have a botanical focus. And for many of those gardens, they are already engaged in development. And what we're seeing, certainly with new generations of botanical organizations and gardens in Africa, for example, and in South America, is integration within development, and particularly ecological restoration. I think that there are a few things we need to bear in mind, though. The first is that 85% of botanical capacity, if you like, in terms of resources, but also the data and the knowledge sits in temperate regions. It's in the northern hemisphere. That is not where the biodiversity is. So it's really important that we address these challenges together globally, because many organizations in the north, including this one, are repositories of huge amounts of information about biodiverse areas of the world. And actually, if you look at what we've been doing over the last century or so, it's largely been about amassing that information in our herbaria, describing plant species, and so on. What we need is a cultural shift now, away from description and discovery, and being much more about how we manage and conserve plant diversity in the landscape. So what I'm always saying in our congresses is it is not enough to tell the world that there's a problem, to document the fact that we are losing plant diversity. We should be deploying our horticulturists, our scientists, and our educators to help solve the problem, because we are privileged in having the knowledge and skills quite often to do that. And one really good example is with trees. Sorry, we're back to terrestrial landscapes. Yeah, mangroves as well, but we have just completed the Global Tree Assessment, which is the largest red listing assessment ever attempted. There are 58,500 tree species that have been described by science in the world. We now know what their conservation status is, and actually at Cali, at COP16, IUCN will be launching the report on that, on where we are. So we know that a third of all tree species are threatened with extinction. That's 17,500 tree species are threatened with extinction. We have over 600 that are critically endangered against the D criterion. That means there are fewer than 50 individuals left of those trees. So these are about to fall off the planet. And guess what? They are in transformed landscapes. They are in landscapes that we occupy. They're not in protected areas. It's the reason that they are threatened. Mauritius and Rodriguez alone have 54 critically endangered tree species. And the habitats are gone. But that doesn't mean that we can't nurture them. It doesn't mean we can't make peace with nature. I live in Western Europe, in a completely transformed landscape for the last millennium. But that doesn't mean there's no biodiversity. I have oak trees in my garden that harbor thousands of other species, lichens, fungi, insects, mammals, birds. We have to find room for diversity in our landscapes, those that we occupy. And I think that's one of the great things about the Global Biodiversity Framework, is the emphasis on repair and restore, finding room for biodiversity in the landscapes that we, frankly, have trashed. And that's where botanic gardens can come in. We grow a third of all known plant diversity. We have the database from actually just a fraction of those 3,000 gardens. We have data from about 1,000 that shows that we grow over 120,000 different plant species in our living collections, 18,000 tree species. We have a moral obligation to make sure that knowledge is shared with broader society, and that we let none of those species go extinct when we know how to manage, how to grow them, and how to conserve them.
Thank you so much, Paul. So there's so much to do and so much that we can do that it's going to be very difficult to prioritize. So I would like to ask you, Christian, as Managing Director of the Bezos Earth Fund's Nature Solutions Initiative, how do you prioritize funding for biodiversity conservation projects, and also contribute to climate resilience? And if possible, what criteria do you use to identify high-impact initiatives?
All right, thank you. So in this sort of fourth chapter of my life, after starting in science, moving to conservation, doing some policy, I've now the philanthropy realm, which has been a really interesting change, and the privilege to work as part of the Bezos Earth Fund team. And we're focusing on nature and climate. That's our mandate. It's around this planet Earth. And the most important thing to start is to recognize that we cannot solve the climate crisis without nature. And if we don't solve the climate crisis, we're going to lose nature. So there are really two issues that are totally interconnected. And of course, we can't do any of this without including and empowering the local communities. And that's a critical issue here. And let me just give you a couple of figures around this. I mean, this meeting and Climate Week and the hundreds of meetings and 40,000 of my closest friends that are here, they're all talking about mitigation. I mean, most of it. That's about the 58 gigatons that are going out there. And that's great, and it's important. And yes, we have to do renewable energy, and we have to fix all these things. But that is all taking nature for granted. But all the models which are focused on carbon flows assume is that the nature carbon stocks are going to be intact. And they're not. Let me just give you one example. One of the places that the Wildlife Conservation Society has done a lot of work for many years, where I used to be CEO, is in the Congo Basin. We think of Congo as this gigantic forest. Well, it turns out there's a massive peatland. And peatlands, if you're familiar with them, are thousands of years. They have incredible amounts of carbon. This one peatland in the heart of the Congo Basin has more than 58 gigatons of carbon. If we lose that one peatland, that's more than the total annual emissions of CO2 from everything we're doing on the planet right now. So and not even to mention the boreal grasslands or the forest or the tropical forest or whatever, we absolutely have to hold on to that, protect nature, protect what we have. We need to restore what we lost, and we need to transform the way we're living. So let me give you 3 examples, one in each of those. In protection, we've decided to make a high priority on 30 by 30. We've worked very closely with Monica when she was Assistant Secretary of State in this. Around the world, and we use 3 key criteria there. Areas of high biodiversity, areas that are that have carbon stocks, very critical, and areas where we think there's a political commitment to actually do something about it. And that's, we can talk more about that later if you want. But that honed in, yes, of course, in some of the tropical forests, as we'd expect, in the Amazon, but also the Andes, high biodiversity, Congo Basin, Indonesia, so tropical forests come in clearly. Don't forget the ocean. We're working a big initiative in the Pacific Ocean, what they call the Blue Pacific Continent, which I think is a wonderful name. But then we're also working in Canada because of the carbon stocks in port. It may not be the hottest place for biodiversity, but it's hugely important in terms of carbon and securing these areas. And speaking of the point that was made before about what we do agree that one of the fundamental pieces of the 30 by 30 strategy, and we're very pleased that we're very active in supporting this, is securing tenure rights for Indigenous peoples, local communities. And just last month, I had the opportunity to be up in Canada, in Baffin Island, with our son, visiting this. And what's happening in Canada, people are not paying attention. But right now, with the leadership of the federal government, there's a series of conservation projects that are about to happen, or starting to happen, and are extraordinary. Next month, in the Northwest Territories, there's going to be 23 First Nations of Canada signing a deal, doing what's called a PFP, where public money, private money is coming in, the land is being turned over. This is going to protect 100 million hectares of land for Indigenous peoples. The Great Bear Sea, where Wade lives, was just closed last month. We're looking at Baffin Island and the whole area there. I mean, this is a critical issue. And in places like the Amazon, I see Avesita Chikchom for the Moore Foundation is here. We're working there in the Amazon, working with the new Brazilian government in terms of helping designate, demarcate, and protect some of these indigenous territories that are there, that are home to more than 400 different ethnic groups just in the Brazilian Amazon. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity to do this. So we have to protect the right places. And by the way, the 30 by 30 is not enough in most places. If Tom Lovejoy were here right now, the first thing he'd say is 30 is not enough. We have to protect 70 to 80% of the Amazon. That's what we really need to do. It needs to be connected. It's critical. And as you know, the worrisome thing is the Amazon is burning right now as we speak. There are 820 fires in the Amazon right now because of changes in climate are starting to impact this and change it. So that's one set of issues. Second is restore. I mean, we have already transformed 70% of the surface, of the terrestrial surface of the planet. By the way, 40% of the planet is being used for livestock. And I'll come back to it in a second. But we absolutely have to bring some of this back. and to restore it. So we're working in East Africa, we're starting to do some work in Brazil and other places to bring some of this back and restore these areas because, as our principal Jeff Bezos likes to say, we already have a wonderful technology to capture carbon, take it from the air, bring it down, whatever. It's called a tree. And we absolutely can use this, but we have to accelerate this. We have to scale it up, and we have to plant the right tree species in the right places and working with the people and empowering those local businesses to do it. So we're working on this, and yesterday I had a meeting with a group called 1 Acre Fund. This group is planting in East Africa 100 million trees this year. The question is, how can we plant 1 billion and 1 trillion trees in the right places and the right issues? And that will be part of the solution clearly in terms of carbon balance. And the third last one is transforming the way we live. We can't do this and just pretend that we're going to continue expanding and having the same issue. We have to change. We have to change, and the area that we're focusing on, we're doing some work in the energy space, but I just want to speak for a moment about food systems. Paula mentioned the cattle in Pará. We're proudly supporting Nature Conservancy of this. It's insane. I mean, look, 94% of the biomass, of the mammal biomass of this planet is cows. 94%. And yes, we need meat and we need dairy and we need other things, but we can do it a lot better. So one of the things that we're doing, there's no reason right now we can't produce twice the amount of beef or milk in half the amount of surface, and by the way, reduce the methane emissions by 30%. So it's not about saying you have to stop eating beef, although you should, but really changing this in a way so it's not just to trace, as we're doing in Pará, but to really reduce it. We should have 24 million heads of cattle in half the amount of area in Pará, free up this area and restore half of Pará, give it back to nature, make that peace, and empower these communities. And I think that's part of the solution we need to do is. And the last piece in that transformation of food systems is we do have to change. We have to shift our diet. So we've just announced we're putting in $100 million into alternative proteins. This could be plant-based products, it could be cultivated meat or other issues, because we have to change and give people more choices that are more affordable and are nutritious. And just to put it in perspective, if all of us sort of started eating less meat or shifted this, if we reduced the meat consumption by about 10%, that would solve about 1/3 of the climate problem right there. So we have to do this, and it starts with every one of us and the choices that we make. And I think that triad of protect, restore, transform is what we need to be able to link nature and climate, which is what the planet needs right now. So we're very pleased to put that in.
Thank you, Christian. Protect, restore, transform. And you were mentioning also the importance of planting the right tree species. As a reminder, we have also a super panel this afternoon after the documentary on super trees for a sustainable future. So if you can stay, because we are going to continue this conversation of which are those right species, right tree species that we should be focused on. And you were mentioning very clearly about the importance of recognizing that climate change is interconnected with biodiversity. That's one of the main topics being brought by COP16, in addition to peace with nature, mobilizing resources to support these nature-based solutions, and recognizing the importance of traditional ecological knowledge. And what you are saying is very promising. However, we all know that in many cases, even if we have the knowledge to mitigate biodiversity loss and enhance ecosystem services, implementations lag behind, and we haven't been able to move the balance on the other side. So my next question is to Paula. What strategies do you believe can help overcome the political, financial, and societal barriers to scaling up biodiversity conservation efforts across Latin America? And how can organizations like the Nature Conservancy work with governments and local communities to ensure that biodiversity-based climate solutions are inclusive, equitable, and provide long-term benefits to both people and nature.
Thank you. And well, following on what Christian was saying, which is very much aligned with the work that we're doing at TNC, I think that one of the key entry points is the radical collaboration, that we need to work together. And that comes at many levels. In terms of looking across territories and really getting to the scale and the durability of the solutions. Because what Christian has outlined in terms of the work that we need to do in protection and restoring, the issue there is that we've approached this very much project-based. So we have these short cycles and we do projects. They can be $30 million projects, but they end and then we start again with the cycle. So what we're really looking at is how do you take the systems levers that we have, the policy, the finance, the markets, how can we take these and harness them and integrate them in ways that align the interests of different stakeholders, including nature as a stakeholder, if you will, and what are the incentives that are out there and how do those need to be changed and restructured so that you can align around a shared understanding of what good looks like, of what is the direction of travel, that is also not monolithic, but takes into account that ethnosphere that Wade Davis was mentioning earlier. So the PFP, for example, this financial instrument that Christian was mentioning, that's the work of many different organizations coming together with a joint and a shared vision of what needs to happen, and then working and ensuring that you have financial flows at a scale that matters and in the hands that matter. Because it's not just a question, if I can look at the finance lever, of just mobilizing the resources. It's also a question about fundamentally rethinking what is development, what is the models, and what it is that you are trying to solve for. So one of the key areas, and there's been a lot of really heartening conversations this entire week out back in the city, have been around direct access, for example. How do you change the global financial architecture so that you are getting the finance to flow more directly to the ground, to local communities? And that is a fundamental question and a fundamental issue, because we've been talking about how much we depend on these communities and the way that they safeguard and they manage their territories to be able, as Christian was saying, to be able to deliver on our climate, on our biodiversity goals. But right now, about 1% to 2% of global climate finance is flowing directly to these communities. Because in many cases, there's intermediaries that work for indigenous peoples or work for local communities, but not with them. So one of the examples I'd like to bring is the Potali Fund. We worked with indigenous communities and with COIABI, the national indigenous organization in Brazil, for about 10 years to be able to create is today the first indigenous-led fund, whereby it becomes an instrument for self-determination and for them to be able to define what are the enterprises and what are the sustainable production or different kinds of work that they want to undertake according to their reality and their vision of what good looks like. So issues like that kind of direct finance is absolutely fundamental. The other issues around finance is that we need very different kind of finance flowing into this, because these transformations, when Christian was talking, for example, about the work that we're doing jointly in Pará that I mentioned with the traceability and trying to really transform, for example, the ranching sector, you need sometimes significant upfront investments to be able to bring about the transformation in the productive sectors, in the value chains. And that's upfront capital that you need that has to be much more patient. It has to have a completely different understanding of what the risk and reward profiles are. And if we go at this with what Mr. Mohammed was alluding to when she spoke, with sort of a short-term capitalistic, if I can use that term, modus operandi, where you're just trying to get as much value as you can over the short term, you don't get the right kind of financial mechanisms and financial flows. So you need to be able to crowd in the philanthropy and the private and the impact investment, you need to crowd in, just as I was saying with protection, you need the protected areas, you need private reserves, you need the collective territories. You also need to create that kind of a financial ecosystem that can take the risks and understand the rewards of this kind of investment. But it also is, what are you investing in? And so one of the really important areas that I think is also gaining a lot of traction, but comes with a need for many caveats, is this concept of the bioeconomy. And at TNC, we talk very much about the socio-bioeconomy, because bioeconomy is not just about, oh, wow, we have a whole lot of biomass and we can make money and there you go, you have a bioeconomy. It could be a monoculture. Socio-bioeconomy is really about not just an economic equation, it is about a values-based equation. And what it is how do you change the value of the standing forests? Right now, a lot of the deforestation is driven because there are no really good economic alternatives. And just deforesting or illegal activities, whether it's illegal timber or mining, can make a lot of sense, especially in the face of the scarcity of other different kinds of opportunities. So you have to change the opportunity costs of maintaining that standing forest or that grassland or that wetland or that mangrove or that coastal area by generating economic alternatives that bring a different value and that make sense to the communities or to the different kinds of enterprises that can be developed in a given territory. And we have the research and the science to prove this. We've done research that demonstrates that you invest, for example, in about 30 sustainable forest products, you can generate economic returns that are much higher, more sustainable, and generate all those co-benefits. The soil that we don't know what is, as you were saying, that's not really clear with, well, you safeguard the soil, you strengthen that, you mix and you combine the mitigation and the carbon potential, the carbon sequestration, with the adaptation, with the resilience of the landscape, with the resilience and the respect for those livelihoods. And that equation, that ecosystem that you can create through the socio-bioeconomy can be incredibly powerful. And that's around agroforestry. It is around a lot of different ways that you can manage the forest in ways that are sustainable and deliver all these dividends. But to do that, you have to, I go back to the radical collaboration, you have to align the interests and you have to align the incentives and you have to make it clear why there is a win-win so that you can start to understand how that comes together. So the policy is absolutely fundamental when we look at the kind of market signals that policy can give us in terms of why it is that we can have premiums or different kinds of incentives around more sustainable practices. We have to align the finance and definitely the markets, which is also where we as consumers can have a big say in the kind of demand and the kind of consumption patterns that we are bringing forward. So all of these areas are absolutely central if we're going to be able to create solutions that are not just scalable, but also durable, so that we have a systems approach and we are changing entire geographies or entire sectors. And that's what we're working for with partners, many of whom are in this room and many of whom have been exchanging over the last week.
Thank you, Paola. So to scale up and provide long-term solutions, you can now understand the importance of policy to align these incentives, direct finance appropriately, and support initiatives such as bioeconomy. Unfortunately, many of the countries, of the most biodiverse countries, have weak bioeconomies. And it's going to take a while to convert their composition in their economies to go from an oil-based economy to a bioeconomy. But we need to do it, and that's, I think, why it's so important to participate in these meetings, to attend COPs, because that's how we can help influence the transition towards better ways. And Paul, you were mentioning in your comments before that 1/3 of the trees are threatened, and that's quite shocking. So with that amount of, and I suppose that also there's this plant biodiversity is under increased threat because we haven't been able to stop some of these drivers. So how can botanic gardens contribute to scale up nature-based solutions, such as ecosystem restoration and afforestation, to both preserve species and mitigate the impact of climate change? And perhaps how also can botanical gardens support developing countries' bioeconomies?
Thank you. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm going to stick with trees as we are talking about trees. And the irony, as you say, is that we have 1/3 of all described tree species threatened with extinction, which incidentally is more than all of the world's threatened mammals, birds, and reptiles combined. And yet everyone wants to plant trees. We have 350 million hectares of pledges under the Bond Challenge to plant trees for carbon sequestration. And as Christian alluded, the problem there is that people are planting the wrong kinds of trees, and they are planting largely monocultures, and they simply are planting the cheapest, most available trees that there are. And there are risks associated with that. One of the biggest risks is that you actually displace biodiversity. You're planting trees in non-tree habitats, in savannas and highly biodiverse peatlands and so on, and actually damaging biodiversity. So that's a reputational risk for the financiers and the practitioners to a lesser degree. The other risk is that you plant the wrong tree in the wrong place. It's not going to sequester carbon for you. It won't be there in 10, 20, 50 years' time, and it won't be sequestering carbon. So there we can help. And I think this is an area that we've been focusing on for about the last 5 years. We've had first-hand experience of this. BGCI is a funder of projects around the world. We have a project actually in East Africa, in Kilifi County in Kenya, which is called Kaya Connect. The Kayas are traditional sacred forests, and they are a few of the coastal forest remnants now which have these highly threatened tree species in them. And in this particular area, there are 7 critically endangered tree species that occur nowhere else. So we set up a restoration program there, working with the local communities who know their own trees best and who have built the nurseries. We brought in some training for that and so on. And we thought, well, wouldn't it be great to get carbon finance for this? So we paid $30,000 to bring a consultant out, and this was Plan Vivo, who are one of the better carbon certifiers. And the consultant flew in from the north, and he said, sorry, too small and too diverse. We can't cover that for you. So that illustrates the problem. And our carbon financing has to be better than this. So the good news is that we have now set up the Global Biodiversity Standard, which has been developed over the last 3 years, that does 2 things that botanic gardens are really good at. The first is it assesses impacts on biodiversity. And the second is it provides mentoring and support so that practitioners can get better biodiversity outcomes. And it will be launched at Carli Botanical Garden on the 28th of October. So if you're at COP16, please go along. Lovely garden, and it will be open for business after 3 years of development of the methodology with the Society for Ecological Restoration. And the beauty of it as well is that the hubs that carry out the assessment and the mentoring are from the countries concerned. They are already organizations that have been practicing biodiverse ecological restoration for decades, and they've been selected on that basis, so that it's not just us saying, you guys are doing a bad job. We're saying, you're doing a bad job, but we can help you do something better. And that combines our scientific expertise and data with the horticultural expertise that we have around growing a wider range of plant diversity. So those hubs have now been established in 12 countries around the world: Peru, Brazil, India, Malaysia, Kenya, Uganda, Madagascar. I won't go into all of them. And this year we're training 200 assessors, and we will be opening up for business to say, if you're a financier of tree planting somewhere and you aren't sure that what you're paying for is what you're getting, then use this mechanism as a third-party audit, because not only can we tell you if you are planting the right trees in the right place, we can also help you get better biodiversity outcomes. Thank you.
We are actually very excited about the global biodiversity standard, and we are looking forward to test it here as well. So going back to the oceans, Monica, as someone who has led both governmental and not governmental efforts on biodiversity, what role do you think marine protected areas play in mitigating climate impacts, and especially how can we scale up these efforts to safeguard ocean biodiversity?
Thank you for the question, and it is a really crucial problem. Of the many SDGs, oceans is one of them. It's SDG 14. It gets the least funding of all the SDGs. In climate solutions, I think we get 3% of the funding for climate solutions. That's not enough. It's clearly not enough. There are some bright spots out there. We too have some standards coming out for ocean carbon storage and mangroves, the kinds of things that will help bring certainty to markets and hopefully bring more investment, but we have to go faster. There's some other great models out there. Christian's been involved in one of them, in which we have done debt for nature swaps that have protected huge amounts of ocean space around the Galapagos. There's another brilliant one off Belize. We are trying all kinds of different ways to bring capital to ocean conservation, because it's so sorely needed. As I said, it stores 90% of the heat that we create from burning fossil fuels, and it's 50% of the carbon. So it deserves a lot more than what it gets. But we have to get more creative, and we have to have a better, more of a sense of urgency. The time is now. And I'll maybe end where I started, which is, everyone thinks that's so big, it's so hard, this is such a huge problem. But there is something everyone can do, and you hinted at it, Patricia, and I think there's huge value as consumers in making demands of big corporations and the system itself. Everyone can do something. If you think that you can't, I'm begging you to think again. My future grandson is begging you, because we all have a lot more power than we think. We have a lot more power to influence the people around us. We have a lot more power to influence politicians, whether they're our mayors or our governors or our presidents, but only if we try. Only if we, and there's a great exhibit at the zoo across the street, Christian, you know this one, where you stand in front of a mirror and it says something like, you're looking at the thing that's the greatest threat to Earth. And I always thought there should be a second mirror next to it that says, and you move over and you're looking at the greatest power to actually fix it.
So we could continue talking with these amazing speakers for hours and hours and hours, but the time is short. So I would like to ask you, each of you, to give us, to share with us a final thought about thinking about the title of this panel, also Nature's Shield, Harnessing Biodiversity for Climate Resilience. Thinking that never before we had so much technology and information. We have the recognition of the importance of the traditional knowledge. We have an understanding of the crisis that we are facing, and we think we have ways to address it. You have heard lots of different solutions. So it seems that there's a a pathway to move forward. So if in 2 minutes or less you can give us your main recommendations to close this panel. And who would like to start?
I'll start, and I'll go fast. I'll go back to that treaty that we helped to negotiate for the high seas. And, you think about how, and this was just a year ago, and the Ukraine war was in full, it was fully on, and we faced that challenge. And yet, the people of the world came together. And so I know we think about environmental problems as local, but we really need to think about bringing a whole of the planet together to solve them. And I think if we can find a way to get all the countries of the world unanimously to agree to a treaty like that, we have to get it implemented, but we are agreed on the language. I have a lot of hope that we can solve these challenges. It's just a question of putting our heads together, doing the collaborating, finding the political will, and all of you can make a difference. It's got this really complicated name. It's called the Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, or Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. So it's either called ABNJ or BBNJ. Areas, because the whole goal is to create marine protected areas. I probably should have said this. Marine protected areas on the high seas, to create parks in the parts of the ocean that no one had jurisdiction over before. We couldn't have made them until we all agreed that we wanted them. Now we have to do it.
Gosh, I think one thing that I would say is don't be afraid to fight for biodiversity. There are plenty of people who will speak for people, plenty. And what we find time and time again with sort of integrated approaches and so on is that biodiversity is inevitably subordinate to people's needs. So we do need more people speaking for those who cannot speak for themselves. And I think that is a movement that we need to grow. Yes, we have to solve our human problems around livelihoods, development, climate, and so on. But we should also not be afraid of speaking for biodiversity and being champions for biodiversity. We need as many of those as we can get.
I would urge everybody to question your reality, question your interpretation of what needs to be done. And I think very much harken back to the kind of multiple realities or multiple visions that Wade outlined for us. 10 years ago, the prevailing paradigm for international development was this narrow set of goals that were socially focused only, and that said that only developing countries had any role or any development issues and had to undertake everything. And it divided the world into developed and developing, and it created these silos and said that we were going to deal with poverty and with hunger as standalone. When this idea of the SDGs came along, we were told that we were nuts, that it was preposterous, that it was unrealistic, because it was a paradigm shift. Because we were saying that all countries, that every single community in the world had development issues, even if they were different, that everybody had to work together, that there was nothing that was environmental, that there's no such thing as biodiversity separate from economic and social and cultural and spiritual and other dimensions, that everything is integrated. And now it just seems natural that the UN has these SDGs. It wasn't natural. There was a huge fight. And so that's also what question, but question so that you can disrupt. Question so that you look at what are the prevailing paradigms around you? What is the realities or the systems that we're trying to just tweak and adjust? And how do we bring wholesale disruption so that we can shift sectors and shift systems and really create a completely new understanding of what it is that we need to move into as we move into the 21st century. So question and disrupt. Be brave.
So going to finish with a reflection tied back to the botanical garden. I spent the last 3 days running all over Manhattan in this jungle of concrete and steel, talking about all the impacts of climate change and whatever. It's exhausting. And we're here today at the New York Botanical Garden. I think Eric Sanders, or maybe the audience, one of the things I learned from him, of course, is that cities are a huge part of the solution because they concentrate people. They're good for education, for health, for so many things. And yet more and more people live in cities become disconnected from nature. And thank goodness for Central Park, for Prospect Park Zoo and some others, but thank goodness for the New York Botanical Garden. So you come in here, when you come in here and you connect with nature. You really do. I mean, it brings you back. And I think the power, the one thing Paul did not mention, since I worked on many issues with botanical gardens and issues, is the role that the gardens have, not only as a place, but if you take your 3,000 gardens or the thousands of zoos or others, we host millions of people every year. 1 billion people a year. The power that we have to connect people in nature, to give them choices, to empower them, and every one of you and every one of us to make different choices every day is crucial. And I just want to say thank you for the work that the garden is doing. I see several of the trustees that are here. I see Barclay Collins, the chair, and others here. Thank you for what the garden is doing to fundamentally change not only New York, and at a time when even this country is so divided. When we see Republicans, Democrats in election, when we see the wars and everything that's going on, nature's the one thing we all share and we can all agree on. And I think that's looking for common elements where we can come, everyone loves nature, everyone wants to take care of nature, and we really have to do it. And I think we're in the right path to do it. And my last comment is thank you, Mauricio, for your leadership. I've had an opportunity to see it, and the way you're bringing the garden, connecting the garden back to the science, to the conservation, to these issues is critical, because it is institutions like the Botanic Garden that are going to build that better future. Thank you.
Well, I guess now we have a mission. An important task. Each of us is part of the solution. Each day stand up and think, what can I do today to make this world better? Because we are not going to make it. It's all of us as a whole, as a society, don't do our part. This is not just the politicians, the decision makers, the leaders of the institutions, it's all society. But all united, we can make a change, and I think we are on track. So please join me for a final round of applause.